Hello, I'm Todd Johnson, and this is Earlylands in Conversation. Today, we welcome Perry Boyle, who has fast established himself as one of the most prominent Western investors via his firm MITS Capital in Ukraine's burgeoning defense industry. Ukrainian defense technology, whether it be highly capable yet low-cost unmanned aerial and ground systems to path-breaking electronic warfare products, is grabbing the attention of Western investors and media and highlighting the fact that defense innovation does not need to involve development cycles taking multiple years and tens of millions of dollars of investment. Perry and MITS Capital and the just-launched MITS Industries is at the leading edge of this trend. Two quick notes. This interview was recorded just a few weeks before President Zelensky's announcement that the Ukrainian defense industry would be allowed to begin exporting certain types of products. And finally, while our editing tool has impressive capabilities to cut out background noise, please be advised that this interview was recorded while Perry was in an airport lounge, and there are a few moments when the bustle of global travel can be heard in the background. We are pleased to welcome Perry Boyle to Earlylands in Conversation. Perry, thank you very much for joining us today. Where are we catching you at?
Heathrow, Terminal 2.
London Heathrow, Terminal 2. So keeping your eye on the departures board, I presume.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. Well, thank you for taking the time to do it, particularly when you are literally in the middle of transit. We'll jump straight into it. First question, Perry, you've had a long and successful career in finance and investing before launching MITS Capital and just recently MITS Industries. Start us off by walking us through that journey. What shaped your career path and how did those experiences prepare you for what you're doing today?
Well, I think everybody has, their own unique path. I won the global lottery in terms of birth. I was born to parents who cared about me, born in Cincinnati, Ohio, raised in a great family, one that really valued work. My father had been orphaned in high school, so it's all about self-reliance.
Sure.
And so I started with a paper route at the age of 9. And at 16, I was essentially emancipated, and I've supported myself ever since then. So I've always had a high sense of urgency to achieve. I went to Stanford, graduated in 3 years, went to work on the street, Salomon Brothers, for 2 years because I didn't want to be poor. My first career decisions were really focused on not being poor.
Right. That's probably a decent lodestar, particularly when you come from a background in which it sounds like you were scrambling a bit.
Yeah. And, parents, raised during the Depression and World War II, so, it was material comfort was highly valued and
Right.
stability, financial stability, highly valued. So I did that. Then I went back to get an MBA at Dartmouth,
Right.
back into banking. But I never really enjoyed what I was doing.
Sure. It was a means to an end.
Means to an end. And then I switched from corporate finance to equity research. I covered the transportation industry, of which I enjoyed. Networking, getting to really see how America works, trucking industry, the freight industry, getting to meet people who really are the backbone for our society. And then where I worked got sold. It got sold again. It was the same. And I had the opportunity to start investment bank. I think we're still the fastest to 500 million in revenue in history.
And what drove that? I'm curious. What was the
internet
secret sauce?
The internet. We were bankers to the internet. We were part of the bubble. And along with the bubble, we had our correction in 2001, close to $1 billion revenues to, I think we lost 70% of our business. And that was pretty traumatic. But we survived that. And so that gave me a good sense for how volatile things can be, especially when you're a business owner, and the importance of taking care of as many employees as you can during hard times.
Right.
Having to lay off people is not success. And then I did that for about 6 years, and I got heavily recruited, and I finally gave in to go to the buy side. I went to a firm that was then known as SAC Capital, a pretty famous and then to become a little infamous hedge fund. And I ended up working at that and its successor for about 15 years. So that was a really interesting experience. Really liked the math of it. I really liked problem solving. I liked some pretty simple business model, put up a return on capital. and I ended up running globally all the long short investing. So I had a portfolio of about 75 portfolio managers. And, I kind of achieved what I wanted to achieve in that professional path. So I tried to retire from that at the end of 2016 and was not successful. The owner woke me back in for a new task to relaunch us as a hedge fund. And so that kind of I'd never done that. I had always been the inside guy. This made the
Right.
outside guy fundraising. And that was very successful. I think we were the most successful launch of an equity hedge fund ever. So I stayed until the end of 2019, and then I retired to Ketchum, Idaho.
Beautiful part
Which
of the
is
world.
beautiful, rather remote, but my wife's family had been there for 35 years, and that our kids had grown and left the house, and it was time to do something else. So I switched from focusing on financial success to trying to leave the world a little better. I was looking for something that where I could move the needle. I settled on starvation level poverty. I found a small nonprofit that was teaching the poorest women in the world how to run a small business so they could become independent. And it worked. So I ended up sharing that for 6 years and helped grow it from roughly 2 million in annual revenues to about 20 million. It's in 7 countries in Africa. It's based in Nairobi. It's called BOMA, BOMA
Right. We'll
dot
put that in the show
NGO.
notes. Yeah.
Yeah. And, people derive any value from what we're talking about. If they want to give back, that's a good way. Go to BOMA.NGO.
Fantastic. Well, Perry, it sounds like you're not very good at retiring.
No, I
Um,
failed. And so I'd kind of done what I wanted to achieve with BOMA and replaced myself there. And then the Russians roll into Ukraine. And I thought that the US was a superpower and wasn't afraid of Russia. And we were pushing back out. And we
right.
didn't do it. And it made me upset. And I felt that the Ukrainians were doing very much what my ancestors had done when they come to the US and fought against the British, fought in the Civil War and fought in the World Wars. Democracy, freedom, tolerance, independence, that the Ukrainians were really fighting for what makes me me. And that it made me upset that we weren't doing more.
Eh,
So I logged on to the International League website
Right.
and applied to fight in Ukraine. So I was filling it out. I knew they weren't going to make me like an artilleryman because I have no experience in the military, but I figured I'd be a
Right.
driver or something, help in any way I could. My application got picked up in the Ukrainian embassy in DC as non-standard.
Right. As
Uh,
non-standard,
and-
atypical.
yes, atypical. And fortunately, a guy was volunteering in there, who's now become my partner, Dennis Gorak, and he had worked in Ukraine for Ukraine's defense prime, uh, and he is the point person with NATO, getting NATO weaponry into Ukraine.
Right.
Um, and we knew the guy who, and we both knew in common the guy who was the point person at NATO to get the weaponry into Ukraine. And
Right.
so that's how we got introduced. That's how I got into Ukraine. Well, basically, the message to me was, no, you're rejected for the military, but
But
can you help us bring money?
right.
Which, given my background, seems like a natural
Right.
request. No, I would have done anything they
Right.
asked. And this is what they asked. So this is what we did. So in January of 2024, Dennis and I and a third partner ended up MITS Capital. February, we put out a fall of companies for our accelerator, which at the time didn't exist anybody.
Right.
We
So
took,
you always had your focus on defense tech. Obviously, that was the
yes,
imperative.
defense tech. Yeah. So my aim with capital is to bring capital into Ukraine to build up Ukraine's defense industry with the goal of getting Russia out, getting Ukraine into Europe, integrated into Europe's defense area. And I'll explain why I think that's valuable, not just for Ukraine, but for Europe. Second. So we started with an accelerator. It worked really well. We didn't know what to expect. We didn't know if companies would apply, but we got some good companies. 5 of them graduated. We gave them seed capital. This was 2024. And we did a second cohort in the summer. So that was in the spring, summer of 2024. And that worked out pretty well. So from the accelerator process, we invested in 9 companies. They are primarily in the drone and electronic warfare supply chain.
Hmm.
Not We do have an air drone, a land drone company. We also invested in 2 U.S. companies. The company has to have an MVP and then a viable product.
Step back a little bit. And so, what at a human level, what has struck you most about working with Ukrainians, entrepreneurs,
Yeah.
technologists, servicemen and women, during this very extraordinary moment in their history? And you were relatively,
Yeah.
or you were new to Ukraine. What has struck
I
you
knew nothing
about
about
working?
Ukraine.
Right,
I
right,
literally knew nothing about Ukraine. I knew where it was on a map. I don't have any
right.
Ukrainian extraction. I've never been to Ukraine. I hadn't been to Ukraine. Willingness to fight, I think, is the
Willingness to
thing that
fight.
really, that they are not going to give in to Russia. They
Right.
have been there, done that. That's not where their future lies. Their future lies to the west, not to the east. They are not part of the Russian Empire. So that's the big picture thing. Other things that strike me is that phenomenally well-educated people.
Indeed. I think was it, I saw it in an IFC report maybe that mentioned that it's the highest per capita number of engineers in any country in the world of
Huh.
trained university or above level of engineers.
I mean, they make things in Ukraine,
Right. Right.
right? They have an incredible manufacturing base there. Um, and to me, that's very impressive. Um, Maybe not as good at selling.
Sure.
Ukrainians, if you, the Ukrainians I know in the US, like what's the number one thing that you had to adapt to in the US? Well, everybody's smiling at me. You
Yeah.
know, like,
That is true.
you know,
There is a bit being a good engineer does not make you a good marketer necessarily.
and, or the small talk, Ukrainians
Right.
can be pretty direct. That
Right.
that's But they have great senses of humor and very acerbic, but also very cultured people. Like these
Of
Ukrainians are
course.
very aware of their history. They treasure and value their poets and their authors and their musicians. It was nothing like what I expected. I'd expected I was going to a city. When I first went to Kiev, I thought I was going to a city that'd be more like Rostov. That
Right.
or bleak industrial gray and,
Oh
oh
yeah.
my god,
It's
what a
certainly
beautiful
not.
city. I mean, Todd, think
Yeah.
about Eve. I mean, beautiful churches, parks,
Right.
river. It's just stunningly
I
sighted.
think the media does not do a great job of dispelling this, that it's like Sarajevo in 93, right?
Right.
That you have to, and it's, God, forbid it ever became like that. But no, it is a thriving arts and culture cafe scene.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
yeah,
It's really a
yeah,
joy to live in. It's a very livable city.
absolutely. Well, so talking about the defense sector, as you, of course, have kind of highlighted what you've done with the as an accelerator and then taking it forward at a high level, what are the biggest tailwinds driving the sector's growth? Of course, the
Yeah.
war.
Well, the
And,
biggest headwind is the Russians. It has created something in Ukraine that might not have happened otherwise, which is
right,
they're not fighting for Ukraine of 2020.
right, right, right,
They're fighting for Ukraine of 2030. They are fighting to build a country that has never existed yet in Ukraine.
indeed,
And that's very inspiring to me. But Ukraine brings many competitive advantages to the battle. First, we talked about the highly skilled workforce. Um, Ukraine was the defense components industry for the Soviet
right.
Union. So they had
Antonov
Antonov.
and
Yeah, exactly.
exactly,
The largest aircraft in the world. They were a major military equipment exporter prior to the full scale invasion. So they had something to work with. And it is the only defense industrial base in Europe that has a cost structure that can compete with China.
right.
It's
And
still
that's a great takeaway. The only defense industrial base in Europe that can compete with China.
And then there is, they get a lot of credit for speed, right? The pace of innovation there, that
Right,
the rapidity in which they have adapted to drone warfare and adopted drone warfare is just incredible. But I think there's more reasons for this other than they just had to because the Russians were, attacking
right,
them. The way they've set up their military is very different from a NATO army. You can't replicate the innovation cycle in Ukraine in any other NATO country. It's
Right.
just not
Right.
possible.
Right.
Not just because they're actually fighting, but because their military is set up so that 1,500 different combat units can buy equipment directly. So it's the closest thing to a market economy for battlefield items that exists. Can you imagine that in Washington, D.C., right? Which has an entire bureaucracy. So in Ukraine, there's no difference, no distance between the warfighter and the factory worker.
Right.
So that the communication loop is continuous, the innovation loop is continuous, and drones are not storable munitions like
Right.
like shells are, because they're adapting and changing every 6 months, sometimes faster. Uh, and so you can't just take a team out of Ukraine and put them in Poland and say, oh, they're going to have the same
Right.
outcomes.
Right.
They're not. And that the Ukrainian military is not just has this independence of action, but it also independent in how it can organize to use the technology. So
Right.
you could dump 1 million of the best drones ever made on the United States Army, and they would still lose against the drone trained, adapted military,
Right.
right? Because it's
Right.
not just the technology, it's the tactics, it's the rate of change, it's anticipating how things will. It's how you organize your units. It's how you organize your supply chains. It's a whole new way of organizing that NATO has not fought on to. And it's really primarily focused with the tech side of it rather than the military side of it. And this is why NATO needs Ukraine. The other thing we're learning is that NATO isn't really fit for purpose.
Right.
Okay, that it's the whole purpose of NATO is to keep the Russians out of Europe. It is objectively failing at that task. Okay, it's not just the Russian drones into Poland. It's not just the Russian MiGs into Estonia. It's the
Right.
gray war that Russia is conducting in every European capital
Yeah. It's
every day.
burning IKEAs.
Yes, it's infiltration of the media. NATO, it's still fighting the last war. It hasn't developed the tools to counter Russian aggression. So how is that going to adapt? I don't think NATO is the answer. I think because they don't all share the same interests. Spain does not have the same interests as Finland when it comes
Right.
to Russia. The frontline countries, the Nordics, Poland, the Baltics, Ukraine, they share the same enemy. They're
Right.
suffering very similar aggression. Clearly, Ukraine is currently bearing the brunt of it, but Russia has a plan that
Mm.
shows well beyond Ukraine. And the other countries need to get their act together and coordinate their military response to this. And this is why we created MITS Industries.
Right. Yeah. So, well,
Okay.
that's a good segue. Tell
Yeah,
us.
it's a
So, we
good
went
segue.
from MITS Capital, which obviously still
Mhm.
exists, but MITS Industries is most recently what's made the headlines. Tell us about it.
So MITS Industries is a Danish company that operates in Ukraine.
Mhm.
It's a consolidation of several Ukrainian defense tech companies. And it will be today I would call it a micro prime for defense
Right.
tech. And our goal is to make it a macro prime, to
Right.
use it as a platform for growth and for acquisitions to create something substantial in defense tech innovation for the current situation, but also for the future situation. Why Denmark? Because Denmark is a country that has been the most supportive of Ukraine. They came to us, they came to MITS Capital and said, can you do this? There's 6 million people in Denmark. They're not going to have a defense industrial base like Ukraine does. I think Denmark is like America's second ally after France in terms of history. Like
Sure.
they've been a staunch ally of the United States and they buy a lot of American war material, but the US cannot supply them what they need to repel the Russians. And Ukraine can. So integrating Ukraine's defense industrial base and innovation cycles into Nordic capital and
Right.
Nordic technology is the best way to create this drone wall to keep the autocracies out of the
Right.
democracies.
So you're saying
And
it's a
that's what,
win-win it's not just a
oh,
CSR exercise for Denmark. This is Denmark just
no,
making a
no, no, no.
smart
This is a
strategic move.
strategically important move.
Right.
And, it's not just Denmark. Like we'll have other Nordic countries invested in
Right.
this company. We'll have production, not just in Ukraine, but in other frontline countries.
Do you think so? Will you be producing? So you mentioned the 4 Ukrainian companies that will fall under the MITS Industries banner. Will they be
Mhm.
producing their technology in Denmark, or is that to be determined? Sort of how that will
Well,
actually
that's to
work
be
in
determined to
practice?
some degrees. But the intent is for it to be produced wherever in this alliance that it makes the most sense to produce,
Right.
and to integrate Ukraine production into the rest. So, for
Right.
example, Ukraine makes a China component-free infrared cameras. Those
Right.
can go to a number of things. Maybe they can go to something that's already being produced,
Sure. Sure.
or drone motors,
Right.
China-free drone motors, at a close to China price. There's a lot of synergies between the defense efforts of these countries.
Right.
And so its industries is designed to help realize those synergies.
When you and I were last together a few weeks ago, one of the big topics of discussion was the fact that you can't export the Ukrainian defense products at this point from Ukraine. Tell us about that. Tell us about some of the regulatory and other political dynamics that the industry has to confront or face if it really wants to become a global player.
Yes. So, um, in the battle against Russia, Ukraine needs to muster everything it can. This makes perfect sense. 3 years ago, Ukraine imported most of what it uses. This year, it produces within the borders of Ukraine almost 2/3 of what it uses against the Russians. This percentage keeps going up. I mean, it's not just drones. Ukraine is the world's largest producer of howitzer.
Mhm.
They produce more guns than all of NATO combined. One of the platform companies in its industries is a company called Tencor. They are
10
the
corn, right?
largest. Yeah, they are the largest producer of ground drones. They make
Right.
more ground drones than the entirety of NATO combined.
But they're not allowed currently to
Oh,
export,
yes.
right?
So in areas where they have excess capacity that cannot be consumed on a battlefield today, not only will they be able to export, they need to export. Ukraine's economy needs foreign exchange, needs economic activity, and already in some areas of components, there are exports occurring today. Hey,
Right.
it's just in the Finnish drone cycle, you see very few exports. I think Estonia was allowed to purchase some. Again, what cannot be consumed by the military will be exported, and I expect this to start happening in the first quarter of 2026. So, at Industries, we have hired a team that's focused solely on exports. So,
Right.
to get all the companies in its industry, all the operating units, getting them ready for export,
Right.
catalogs, uh, NATO registration numbers, everything that you need to
Right.
be able to do this. We're trying to right now. We're interviewing distributors, and so that when the flag is dropped,
Right.
that we can go.
Right. What do you think Western investors and defense players, the primes like Northrop Grumman or Boeing, et cetera, what do they most misunderstand about Ukraine today, about Ukraine defense tech today?
Maybe less than I thought. The more I learn about the defense industry, the more I realize that the defense industry is really the defense budget industry. If
Play
you
the
look at
budget
Europe,
game, huh?
yeah, playing the budget games. If you look at Europe, there's at least 5 manufacturers of tanks, 5 manufacturers of howitzers, like they don't need them.
Right. Right.
Okay. But defense budgets are used primarily for domestic economic stimulation
Right.
and domestic vote buying,
Right.
basically.
Right.
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 And if you look at the Western aid that's been given to Ukraine, almost all military aid is made not in Ukraine, but in the UK, in the US, or
Right.
France, or Finland, and then shipped to you. And most of it is the cleaning out of the closet, right?
Right.
They use stuff to Ukraine, and then they turn on their factories to replenish their stuff with new stuff,
Right.
and this is
Right.
perfectly understandable.
Right.
Okay, I'm not judging that. I'm just want people to understand that
The Canadians who had offered, they had a gun buyback program of illegal weapons in Canada. And then they offered all of those illegal weapons to Ukraine. And the Ukrainians, it was very, said, thank you, but no thank you. We don't need your grab bag of grandpa's stolen pistol from his World War II days.
Yeah.
We're a little bit more complicated in advance than that. But yeah. So you're saying though that the primes and these companies get what's coming out of Ukraine. They understand the competitive threat, but also maybe the acquisition opportunity.
Well, I also think that they're kind of waiting on the wings to see, because now there's a large number of companies in Ukraine, and they're probably seeing how it shakes out and who the winners are going to be, and then they'll try and pounce on those who pick them up for cheap, and that will be a tragedy for Ukraine. And this is why we created MITS Industries.
How do you separate the wheat from the chaff, right? I mean, say the war, let's hope there's some sort of ceasefire. How do they rise at the top? And those that are more a matter of, product of necessity, they'll fade away. But what will make the difference between the two?
I think that the difference will be companies that produce things that have an international demand for them. And this is why we focus on components, because components are dual use. And that's why we want to get these companies exporting while the war's on, so that when the war's off, they can succeed and thrive for the long time. Right. And so it's not just a war play. But I think it's very hard to get to Ukraine. It takes, from New York, it takes 2 days.
Yep.
So, it's hard. And then you can't repatriate capital beyond a limited amount. There's no exits for venture companies because there's no IPO market, and there's no internal consolidation platforms. And I think, MITS Industries will be the first of what will be several defense primes.
So what will success look like for you in 5 years for MITS Industries? What would you love to see?
Yeah, MITS Industries in 5 years will be a publicly traded company with a product lineup that is focused on the drone supply chain, counter drone, electronic warfare, the new modern battlefield. MITS Industries will be a key supplier into Europe's defense wall against Russia and China and Iran. I can't even say the words. There's two, very prominent defense neo primes in the U.S. and we hope to join the ranks of the neo primes. We have first mover advantage in defense tech. There's heavy industry that can be consolidated as well. There's other areas within. We're not making lethality. We're not making munitions. There should be a company that does that.
Right.
At scale.
Well, a lot of people listening will be wondering what the role of governments are in encouraging innovation versus the role of private capital. The Ukraine example, so many case studies will come from this, from Brave One and the government-backed defense accelerators to what you guys have done with your accelerator. But where do you see the balance from Washington, Brussels, Kyiv, making this unbelievably vibrant, ecosystem? Where's government's role? Do you think that Brussels and Washington will learn from what they've seen in Kyiv?
They'll learn some and they won't learn others. I think the way that the defense, Eisenhower said, beware the military industrial.
Sure.
He didn't exactly say that, but that's how it was true. And I don't think he was wrong.
Right.
Once you're a major defense prime for your nation, you're a national company of national importance, and you will be protected by your nation, and you will have a primary access to its defense weapon. This is anti-competitive, is anti-innovative, right. And I think is ultimately a problem. But if you look at the initial stages of World War I for the U.S., or especially World War II, people forget that the first 6 months of World War II, the U.S. lost every battle it fought.
Indeed.
Eisenhower fired almost every general. Our equipment was not up to par. It took us a while to get into what was needed to prosecute that war. And it's not like we didn't see the war coming. People knew the war was coming for 6 years. We know it's coming, but we don't act. And I don't know how to change that. I'm about as loud a mouth as you can find on this topic.
Right.
But nobody's really listening in DC. Uh, or they listen and they agree, but they don't act.
It's a frog in the pot. And right now,
Yes.
just it's yet another drone incursion at a major airport or a mysterious fire somewhere.
I think Russia relies on this. I think that's part of their strategy. Oh, we'll just boil the frog slowly.
Exactly. Well, my friend, two last questions. First one, what is, and this is a whole book could come from this. What's the one major learning?
Yeah, that the will to fight is everything. That if you have the will to fight,
Sure.
uh, you can persevere because generally the defender has a higher will to fight than the invader. Like almost none of the Russian troops want to be there, right? And yet every Ukrainian defender feels they have to sit.
Right.
And that creates an asymmetry of action that just doesn't exist without the will to fight. And
Right.
so that to me is the number one thing that you have to have the will to fight or you will lose.
Have to have the will to fight. When you look at one army, that most troops that are there because of the large inducement payment to get out of a dead end town and the Urals, or and
Yeah.
then the Ukrainians see it as an existential threat to nationhood and family.
Yeah. I mean, you
And
just look at the volume of Russian deserters to Ukraine. Like they don't
yeah,
desert into Russia, they desert into Ukraine because they know they'll be freed fairly.
right.
Russia doesn't observe any of that.
Last question, my friend. You've told us that you became very smart very quick on Ukraine and on the defense sector, defense tech sector. Give us a couple books that
Oh,
you used or you
okay.
read.
So yeah, it wasn't books, it was people. And I picked the right partner.
Yeah,
And I'm very fortunate in that I work with incredibly patriotic, dedicated, very capable Ukrainian
right.
heroes who are doing this to build the future. If I've added any value, it's just been as a catalyst expert. No, I will never be an expert on Ukraine.
Well, don't undersell the value of a good catalyst, by the way. But yes,
Yeah,
Ukraine is probably one of those countries that you could spend your whole life realizing how little you know.
yes,
Layers
exactly.
of the onion, as they would say. Well, Perry,
Yes.
thank you very much, my friend, and particularly joining us while you're in between flights. Are you headed back to the U.S. or heading
I'm back
east?
to the US for a couple weeks and then I'll be back in Ukraine.
Fantastic. Well, Perry, thank you and safe travels.